My name is Cassian Merrick. I'm 32, a lighting technician who specializes in maintaining high-end systems, chandeliers the size of small cars, museum-grade picture lights, and smart rigs that can turn a hallway into a runway with one voice command. But most days my world was simple. A rented two-bedroom in a quiet town, a toolbox that always smelled like metal and dust, and my mother, Verna, who lived with a softness that didn't match the hard life she'd survived. She worked at the library, kept her hair pinned back like she was always preparing for a storm, and avoided old photographs the way some people avoid mirrors. My father, Silas Merrick, died when I was 16. He was a gentle mechanic with steady hands and a stubborn kindness who never once asked my mother about the life she'd lived before he found her. Even as a kid, I knew some doors you don't open. Whenever I asked Mom about her past, she'd get terrible headaches that would last for days. So I learned to stay quiet and just be grateful for the family I had. I never thought I'd step into the world of the truly rich. Not until the morning my company dispatcher called and said, "Cassian, we need you on a priority job today." Crane Manor. I laughed. Crane? As in Thaddeus Crane? There was a pause, like I'd said a forbidden name. "Yeah," she said, "that Thaddeus Crane. Billionaire. Mansion on the hill. Don't ask questions, just show up looking professional." An hour later, I was driving past gates that looked like they belonged to a private country. Security cameras tracked my car like calm, unblinking eyes. The driveway curved through manicured gardens so perfect they didn't feel real. When the mansion finally appeared, it didn't look like a house. It looked like an empire. Inside, everything whispered money, marble floors that reflected the ceiling, walls lined with art, chandeliers that glittered like frozen fireworks. A head of security, Darius Pembroke, tall and stone-faced with the bearing of someone who'd spent years in law enforcement, checked my ID, then guided me to the job. Former FBI, I'd later learn, now serving as Thaddeus Crane's right hand and head of security. He led me to a portrait gallery with antique sconces and dimmed picture lights. "Don't touch the artwork," he said, not unkindly. "Just the fixtures. This wing stays locked most of the time. Mr. Crane had it opened specifically for this work." I nodded, professional, focused, until I looked up. There, in the center of the gallery, hung a painting so vivid it felt like it was breathing. A young woman in a pale dress stood near a river, sunlight on her cheek, eyes turned halfway toward the viewer like she'd been called by name. My stomach went cold, because the face was my mother's face. Not similar. Not kind of. It was Verna, only younger, untouched by time, and terrifyingly familiar down to the faint curve of her mouth when she looked like she wanted to speak but didn't trust the world enough to. I stepped closer, without meaning to. My hands, steady hands that wired million-dollar fixtures, started to shake. A voice behind me cut through the room like a blade. "What are you doing?" I turned and saw him. Thaddeus Crane. Not on a magazine cover, not on a screen. In real life, he looked older than the photos, mid-60s maybe, sharp suit, silver hair, eyes that had learned to hide everything. I swallowed. "Sir, I'm working on the lights." His gaze snapped to the painting, then back to me. "Then work." I should have stopped there. I should have backed away and acted like the world made sense, but the words fell out of me like a careless confession. "She looks a lot like my mother, sir." For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then his face broke. Not a polite crack. A full collapse like someone had struck the foundation of a man who'd been standing upright through sheer will. He took a step toward the painting, trembling, and his voice came out raw. "That's not possible." Darius moved instantly, protective. "Mr. Crane..." Thaddeus lifted a hand to silence him, eyes wet, fixed on me. "What did you say your name was?" "Cassian," I whispered. "Cassian Merrick." His throat bobbed as if he was swallowing glass. "Where is your mother?" I didn't answer fast enough. His voice rose, desperate now. Where is she? That day ended with me finishing the job in a daze and being escorted out as if I'd accidentally stepped into a room where grief was kept locked away. And then, nothing. No calls, no messages. Just silence heavy enough to feel like a threat. 3 days passed and I worked like a machine, fixing lights at galleries and museums, but my mind kept circling back to the silver-haired man and that painting. I didn't dare tell my mother. She's always been sensitive, and I was terrified of triggering those headaches that had plagued her my entire life. But this time, silence was torture. I kept seeing that painting, kept seeing his face collapse, kept wondering what connection could possibly exist between my quiet mother and one of the richest men in America. 3 days later, I was at my shabby little office, eating a cheap sandwich at my workbench, when the front door opened and the room seemed to dim. Darius stepped in first, scanning like a weapon. Behind him came Thaddeus Crane, a billionaire in a building that smelled like paint and old coffee. He didn't look powerful now. He looked haunted. "Please," he said, and the word didn't belong in his mouth. "I need to see her." I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. "My mother doesn't do strangers." Thaddeus flinched like he deserved that. "I'm not a stranger." Then he looked at me with a kind of fear that didn't fit his status at all. "I've waited 33 years, he said. "If she's alive, I need to know." I should have said no. I should have protected Verna from whatever storm this man carried, but the painting had already opened a door in my head I couldn't close. That night, I brought him to our small house. Verna answered the door in her cardigan, hair pinned back, the same guarded eyes I'd known my whole life. She saw Thaddeus and froze like her body recognized him, even if her mind didn't. Thaddeus's face collapsed again. He took one step forward, then stopped, like he didn't deserve to breathe her air. "Delphine," he whispered. My mother's hand flew to her temple. I recognized that gesture, the beginning of one of her headaches. "I'm sorry," she said, voice tight with pain. Thaddeus's hands trembled at his sides. "Delphine Lockhart." Verna's expression tightened, confused and defensive, her other hand still pressed against her head. "My name is Verna Merrick." I watched two realities collide in the space between them. Thaddeus swallowed. "You don't remember?" Verna's voice sharpened, frightened. "Remember what?" "I don't know you." He looked like he might fall. "You disappeared. I thought you were dead." My mother's face went pale, but she grabbed the doorframe like she wouldn't let herself be pulled into his story. That's not me," she said, but her voice didn't sound sure. The headache was getting worse. I could see it in the way she squinted against the porch light. Thaddeus tried again, softer, more specific. "The river, the bridge, the night you wore that blue ribbon in your hair, the night I was going to propose." Verna flinched, just slightly, like someone had tapped a bruise she didn't know she had. And then she did something that made my chest ache. She shut the door. Not in anger, in survival. After that, things moved like they were being dragged by an invisible chain. Thaddeus sent flowers that Verna threw away. He sent letters that she refused to open. He sent a message through Darius, a small gathering at Crane Manor, just a few people. He promised. A safe place to talk. Verna said no. Then my mother started waking up at night, sweating, clutching her throat, whispering, "Cold water." The headaches that had always come when she tried to remember the past were getting worse, more frequent, like something inside her mind was trying to break through a wall she'd built for protection. I'd never seen her like that. Some nights I woke to the sound of her pacing the hallway, footsteps slow and deliberate like a sleepwalker. She'd stand at the kitchen window staring at nothing, hands wrapped around herself, pressing her temples. When I asked if she was okay, she'd just nod, and smile that fragile smile that told me she was lying. So when Thaddeus invited us again, begging this time, I convinced her to go. Not because I trusted him, because I couldn't stand watching her be afraid of her own shadows, trapped by a past she couldn't access and a present that was making her sick. Crane Manor at night was even more unreal. Lights glowing golden through tall windows, music soft and classical drifting through perfectly decorated rooms. The guests were elegant, quiet, looking at us like we'd wandered in from a different life. Verna clutched my arm, tense, noticed her scanning the room like she was looking for exits. Thaddeus approached slowly, careful. "Thank you for coming." His voice was gentle, like he was trying not to spook a wounded animal. Before Verna could answer, a woman's voice sliced through the room. "Oh my God." We turned. A woman in a red dress stood near a table of crystal glasses, one hand covering her mouth. Her face was my mother's face, same cheekbones, same eyes, only harder, sharper, alive with shock and something that looked like terror. The glass in her hand slipped and shattered on the floor. She stepped forward, shaking. "No, no, this isn't possible." Verna stared back as if she was looking at a ghost that had stolen her reflection. The woman's lips trembled, then curled with something ugly, fear, rage, disbelief all mixed together. And then she said the words that changed everything. "Sister," her voice cracked, rising toward hysteria. "Sister, how are you alive? You should be dead." The room fell into a stunned silence. My mother swayed. "Verna!" I grabbed her, but her knees buckled. Her hand went to her head, and she let out a gasp of pain. Thaddeus lunged, catching her with a sound that was half sob, half prayer. The woman in red took another step forward, and now her voice came out strangled, like the words were being ripped from her throat against her will. "I pushed you. I pushed you into the river myself. You were supposed to drown." Chaos erupted. People shouting, gasping, pulling out phones. Darius moved like a shield, stepping between the woman and my mother. Someone was calling an ambulance, and the woman in red, Cordelia, I'd later learn her name, stood there shaking, eyes wild, as if she'd just confessed to a crime she'd convinced herself never happened. Her hands were trembling, her face had gone white, and she kept whispering, "No, no, I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean—" At the hospital, Verna lay pale under harsh lights while doctors asked questions and nurses moved like quiet ghosts. Then my mother's eyes opened, and for the first time, she didn't look like Verna. She looked like someone waking up in the wrong life. "Cassian," she whispered. "I'm here," I said, gripping her hand. Her gaze slid past me, searching. "Thaddeus?" she said, like the name had been waiting behind a locked door for decades. Thaddeus, sitting in the corner like he'd been afraid to exist too loudly, stood up so fast his chair clattered. "Delphine," he breathed. My mother's face crumpled, tears spilled. "I remember the bridge." My stomach twisted. "Mom." She squeezed my hand hard, and for the first time in my life, there was no pain in her eyes when she spoke about the past. The headaches that had plagued her for 33 years were gone. I remember falling. I remember hands on my back. I remember her face looking down at me as I went over the rail. I remember the cold water. I remember everything. Cordelia, the twin sister. The truth came in fragments over the next days, like torn pages being stitched back together. 33 years ago, Delphine Lockhart had been engaged to Thaddeus Crane before he was a billionaire, back when he was a brilliant young man with ambition and love in equal measure. Cordelia had always lived beside her twin like a shadow, the quieter one, the one people forgot was in the room. She'd been jealous, bitter, convinced Delphine had stolen the life meant for her. On the night of Delphine's engagement party, Cordelia lured her twin to the bridge near the river with a fake apology, saying she wanted to make things right between them. Then she pushed her. Delphine survived, but the river stole her memory, and the impact stole her identity. She was found miles away after a car accident during a storm, labeled Jane Doe in 1991. Treated for trauma and amnesia, then quietly placed into the system. That was where she met Silas Merrick, the man I'd called my father my whole life. A gentle mechanic with steady hands and a stubborn kindness. He fell in love with the woman who didn't know her own past. He gave her a name. Verna, because it sounded like winter turning into spring, he once told me. And he never asked her to be anyone else. The doctor said it was a miracle she survived at all, let alone carried me to term. The trauma should have ended the pregnancy, but somehow I held on. Silas used to say I was a fighter even before I was born. He raised me as his son without hesitation, without ever treating me like I was anything other than his own flesh and blood. He died when I was 16, and my mother never recovered from the grief of losing the man who saved her life without ever understanding how heroic he'd been. When I asked her, when I begged her, if any of this was true, she stared at me like she was standing on that bridge again. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Cassian, I swear I didn't know. For 33 years I thought I was Verna Merrick. I thought the nightmares were just nightmares. I thought the headaches were just headaches. I never knew I was someone else." And then she told me about Cordelia, about how after Delphine disappeared, Cordelia was the one who comforted Thaddeus, brought him meals, ran his business when he couldn't function. She was there every day, wearing her sister's face, and Thaddeus married her not for love, but for survival, because her face was the only thing that made the grief bearable. He never knew the truth, that the woman who killed his fiancée was sleeping beside him for 33 years. Thaddeus visited every day after that. Not with billionaire arrogance, without entitlement, just patience. He brought old photographs that made my mother sob. There she was, young and alive, wearing that blue ribbon in her hair the night he'd planned to propose. A pressed flower in a book from their first date. A ring box she'd once thought lost forever. And as her memory returned, piece by piece, something else returned too. Fear. Because Cordelia's confession at the party hadn't been a slip. It had been a warning. 2 days after my mother left the hospital, one of the house staff, a young woman who did cleaning at Crane Manor, nervously approached Darius. She'd overheard Cordelia on the phone, voice frantic, saying, "She remembers. Delphine remembers everything. She told Thaddeus about the bridge. We have to do something before she talks to the police." Darius immediately tightened security around our house, but I refused to let my mother live in fear. 3 evenings later, I was leaving a job site when my phone rang. It was our home number. I answered, and for a second there was nothing. Then I heard a crash, a gasp, furniture scraping across the floor. "Mom?" I shouted into the phone. The line went dead. My heart stopped. I tried calling back. Nothing. No answer. Just ringing into an empty house. I sped home, breaking every traffic law and praying I wasn't too late. When I burst through the door, I saw a masked figure behind my mother, a plastic zip tie stretched tight around her throat. Verna's face was purple, eyes bulging, hands clawing at the tie, making horrible, choking sounds. My brain went white. Let go of my mother. I tackled the attacker into the wall. We crashed through a side table. Pain exploded in my shoulder, but I didn't care. I fought like an animal, ripping at the mask, punching blind, fueled by terror. The attacker was strong, trained, but I had something he didn't. I had everything to lose. He kicked me off and sprinted toward the back door. As he ran, I saw him fumble with something in his pocket. And outside, a car peeled away so fast the tires screamed. I stumbled to the window and caught the plate, just enough numbers and letters burned into my brain. I repeated them over and over as I ran to my mother. She collapsed into my arms, gasping like she'd been dragged back from the river a second time. The zip tie had left angry red welts around her throat. Darius arrived with Thaddeus minutes later, face murderous with fury. I gave him the license plate. He made one phone call, and within the hour we knew exactly whose car it was. That night, shaking, voice thin and raw, my mother finally told me everything she remembered. "I was Delphine Lockhart," she whispered, "and my sister tried to kill me. Twice." We didn't wait for luck. We gathered evidence. Darius, using every contact he still had from his years at the FBI, pulled security footage from the mansion and nearby roads. Traffic cameras showed the rental car circling our neighborhood for 3 straight days before the attack. The license plate led to a rental agreement tied to one of Cordelia's shell companies. Cordelia had always maintained separate accounts, family money she'd inherited before the marriage. Thaddeus never questioned it. Why would he? He trusted his wife completely, never knowing she'd been moving money through shell companies for years, preparing for the day her secret might surface. Thaddeus's legal team dug up records, buried so deep they smelled like intentional rot, old medical files, Jane Doe documentation from 1991, the accident report, the amnesia diagnosis, the relocation paperwork. I did something I never thought I'd do. I visited the county archives, spending hours in a dusty basement flipping through decades-old files. I found the hospital entry, and there it was, in black and white, proof that my mother's lost life wasn't a story. It was a stolen truth. Female, approximately 28 to 32 years old, identity unknown, severe trauma, complete amnesia, and then, months later, another entry. Patient adopted name Verna, married to Silas Merrick, pregnant approximately 3 months, baby healthy despite maternal trauma. The case exploded publicly within weeks. Billionaire's missing fiancé found alive. After 33 years, screamed headlines. Cameras swarmed outside Crane Manor. Reporters camped outside our little house. Cordelia was arrested within days, charged with attempted murder from 33 years ago and conspiracy to commit murder in the present. She showed up to her arraignment in designer black, pretending shock, pretending grief. Her lawyers argued that the party confession was taken out of context, that she'd been in shock seeing her long-lost sister, that her words were misunderstood. But Darius had made sure that 17 witnesses from that party had given statements. 17 people heard her scream, "I pushed you into the river myself." The legal process moved slower than I wanted, but Darius assured me the evidence was ironclad. 8 months later, the trial finally began. The courthouse became a circus. Every morning we had to push through a forest of cameras and shouting reporters. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Darius testified first, walking the jury through the security footage, the timeline, the rental records. The investigator testified next, explaining how the shell company was traced directly to Cordelia's personal accounts. They showed bank transfers, 3 payments of $50,000 each, made to a man named Marcus Hale, a former bodyguard Cordelia had hired years ago. Marcus took the stand, immunity deal in hand, and testified that Cordelia had paid him to take care of the woman in the small house by the river. He described her exact instructions. Make it look like a robbery. Use a zip tie so it's quiet. Get in and get out. The surveillance footage was played on screens throughout the courtroom. There was the rental car circling our neighborhood. There was Marcus Hale, caught on a neighbor's doorbell camera, walking toward our house wearing a mask. The medical expert testified about the 1991 amnesia diagnosis, explaining how severe trauma can completely erase identity and memory. The financial forensics expert walked through every shell company, every hidden account, every dollar Cordelia had moved to cover her tracks. Cordelia sat through it all, still trying to maintain her composure. Designer suits every day, hair perfect, makeup flawless, playing the role of the shocked, wrongly accused wife. But when the prosecutor asked about the second attempt, when he showed the rental records and the payments to Marcus Hale, when he asked her directly, "Did you pay Marcus Hale to kill your sister?" Something in Cordelia snapped. She'd been cornered by the weight of evidence, and her self-preservation instinct broke through the careful mask. She stood up, face flushed, and screamed, "I paid you to kill her, not to sell me out." The courtroom went dead silent. Even her own lawyers looked stunned. Marcus Hale sat in the witness box, perfectly still, as Cordelia's words condemned her. The judge's voice cut through the silence like ice. "Let the record reflect the defendant's statement." Cordelia seemed to realize what she'd done. Her hands flew to her mouth. She collapsed back into her chair, shaking. Her lawyers immediately called for a recess, but the damage was done. The jury had heard everything. When sentencing came 3 weeks later, the room felt heavy with decades of buried truth finally surfacing. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over the entire trial with careful attention, looked at Cordelia with something close to disgust. "Cordelia Lockhart," she said, "you have shown no remorse for your actions. 33 years ago, you attempted to murder your own sister out of jealousy and greed. When she survived and returned, you attempted to kill her again. Your actions were calculated, sustained, and violent. You have demonstrated that you are a danger to society and to your own family." The gavel came down like closure. "I hereby sentence you to 28 years imprisonment, no possibility of parole." Cordelia's scream echoed through the courthouse as deputies moved to take her away. "I'm not guilty," she shrieked, thrashing against their grip. "She stole everything from me. Everything was supposed to be mine. He was supposed to love me." But the truth had finally done what it always does when it survives long enough. It stood up. After the trial, life didn't magically become soft. Healing isn't a montage. It's slow. It's awkward. It's waking up and remembering you're safe, then crying anyway. It's learning to trust that the nightmare is really over. Thaddeus didn't try to buy his way into my mother's life. He earned his way in, one quiet day at a time. He sat with her through nightmares when she'd wake up gasping, feeling phantom hands on her back, phantom water in her lungs. He listened when she talked about Silas, never jealous, never bitter, always grateful. "He gave you a life," Thaddeus told her once, voice thick with emotion. "He gave you safety when I couldn't. He gave my son a father when I didn't even know I had a son." I froze when he said that. My son. I didn't ask what he meant. I told myself grief and relief makes people say strange things. A year passed. Family dinners became normal, still tender, still strange, but real. Thaddeus had offered me everything, a position in his company, access to accounts I couldn't even comprehend, a life I'd never imagined. But I told him I needed time. I'd spent 32 years as Cassian Merrick, son of a mechanic, a man who worked with his hands. I wasn't ready to become someone else overnight. He understood. "Take all the time you need, son," he said, and there was that word again. "The money will be there when you're ready. But right now, I just want to be your father." I found myself laughing in Crane Manor's kitchen, a place that once felt like a museum, now warm with the smell of food and the sound of my mother's voice. Her headaches were gone completely. For the first time in 33 years, her mind was clear, free from the weight of a past trying to break through. One afternoon, I visited Silas's grave alone. I brought flowers like I always did, knelt in the grass and told him everything. About the painting that looked like Mom. About the bridge and the river and the twin sister. About the billionaire who wasn't a villain, just a man who'd lost everything and spent 33 years looking for it. About the mother who'd been 2 women in one lifetime, both of them real. Both of them shaped by love. When I stood to leave, I saw my mother behind me. She looked older than Delphine in the painting. Softer than Verna in survival mode. Just whole. Thaddeus stood beside her, one hand gently resting on her shoulder. "Cassian," she said quietly, "there's something I didn't tell you. Something I didn't know until my memory returned completely." Before I continue, if you're finding this story gripping, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the Payback Chronicles. I share stories like this because they matter, and your support helps me keep bringing them to you. Also, drop a comment and let me know what country you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. My chest tightened. What? She swallowed. Tears formed fast. When I fell off that bridge, when Cordelia pushed me, I was pregnant. The world tilted. No, I whispered. Her voice broke. Almost 3 months along. The doctors at the hospital in 1991, they noted it in my file. They couldn't believe the baby survived the trauma. But you did. You held on through everything. My blood went cold and hot at once. You're saying... Thaddeus stepped forward, eyes shining with tears, like he was afraid hope would make him foolish again. My mother nodded, looking at me with love and truth, and 33 years of protected secrets finally released. Cassian is your son, Thaddeus. Our son. The baby I was carrying the night she pushed me. The baby Silas raised as his own without ever knowing the truth, because I didn't know it myself. Thaddeus didn't move for a full second. Then his face crumpled in a way I recognized now, like a man finally letting himself feel what he'd been starving for. He whispered, "You're saying the baby survived? Our baby?" My throat closed. My hands shook. Looked at this man, this stranger who'd been calling me son for months, and suddenly understood why. He took one careful step toward me, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he moved too fast. Cassian, his voice was breaking. You're my son. My son. I didn't know who reached first, me or him, but suddenly we were in each other's arms, and my mother was between us, holding both of us like she was stitching the last torn seam of a family back together. We stood there in that quiet cemetery, the three of us, crying and laughing and holding on like we'd finally found our way home after being lost for 33 years. Later, we knelt together at Silas's grave. Thaddeus placed his hand on the headstone, and his voice was steady and full of gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for saving her when I couldn't. Thank you for raising my son when I didn't know he existed. Thank you for giving them both a life filled with love and safety. I will never forget what you did for my family. Never." My mother placed flowers on the grave, the same white daisies Silas used to bring her every Sunday. I stood between them, one hand on my mother's shoulder, one hand on Thaddeus's, and understood something that took me 32 years to learn. Blood can tell you where you came from, but love is what tells you who you are. Silas Merrick was my father because he chose to be every single day without needing biology to validate it. Thaddeus Crane was my father because life had tied us together in ways none of us could have predicted. And I was the luckiest man alive because I'd been loved by 2 fathers, one who saved me before I was born and one who found me when I'd already grown. The truth, no matter how long it's buried, no matter how many years pass or how many lies try to keep it down, always finds a way back to the light. And when it does, it doesn't destroy. It heals. It makes you whole. It brings you home.